Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves. Hey, it's Scott Groves on the Edge podcast. And as we were the last couple episodes, we are still finishing off this Blinking Owl bourbon, this Blinking Owl alcohol straight out of California. I have become a big fan. So I will be drinking that while I smoke the El Presidente Padron 1964. And the funny thing is the 1926, I think, is actually a better cigar. But the 1964 Presidente comes in this cool little tin case that is pretty cool. And I'm probably putting some deep-seated psychological smoking issues into the minds of my children because they love playing with these little boxes and these little metal tins and the little wooden boxes that cigars come in. So I will be smoking this 1964 Padron. It's pretty amazing. Having a great whiskey straight here out of California. So life is good. We're recording a podcast. And as you notice, Chris is my only wingman this time. Chris, who's behind the camera, you're going to have to wave. Do we have your camera on?
No, I didn't even turn it on today.
All right. Well, Chris behind the camera, he's going to be my only wingman today. This is going to be a bit of a new segment for us. Basically just three thoughts, right? What are things on Scott's mind? Maybe I'll do this once a week. Maybe I'll do this once a month. Maybe I'll never do it again. But just kind of like what are three quick takes, thoughts, Scott's thoughts, whatever we want to call them. I don't know. We'll find something cool to brand this. And we're actually going to share with you, the audience, a couple things that I'm looking on my screen. So we'll switch over to that. I don't know. Chris will do some cool editing. Either my picture will show up in the bottom corner as like a little, I don't know, avatar or something, or you'll just see my screen, or however much editing he wants to do. It's totally up to him. But obviously, one of the first things that is at the top of my mind right now is the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. Chris, who in the fuck names these congressional acts? It's HR Bill 1319. I don't think anybody in the media has referred to it as American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. It's been called what? COVID relief, bailout. What other names have you heard?
It's clearly named for people that think we need rescuing.
Yes, we definitely need rescue. And I do think there are a lot of people out there that probably need some type of support because the government has effectively put them out of business. But, you know, the first thing you have to do if you're going to look up a law is you got to go to congress.gov. And when you go to congress.gov, if you're looking for a specific plan, you would have to either search for it or Google it here or have to look for the name. Luckily, obviously, because this is probably the most searched piece of legislation in a long time, and it might be the most recent one that just got enacted into law, it's right here at the top. So it's HR Bill 1319, American Rescue Plan. And what's kind of cool, actually, the congressional, I got to give props because usually government websites look horrible, but the congressional website's actually pretty easy to use. You can see it's even laid out nicely. You know, there's a tracker for every bill. You can go see anything that was ever introduced past the House, past the Senate, resolving differences to the president and then became law. So this is pretty cool. And what I'm somewhat freaked out about, and what I think might be the beginning of the end of this kind of republic, because we do live in a republic, not a democracy, this idea of a republic run by many states is that the federal government now is effectively circumventing state powers. And what I mean by that, and by the way, this has been going on for a long, long time. The federal government could basically have their way with local state laws by simply saying something to the effect of, well, California, if you don't want to limit your blood alcohol content for drunk drivers from 0.10 to 0.08, you can do whatever you want because you're an autonomous state within this federal, republic. However, if you do that, we're going to withhold federal funds of $12 billion to repair the 405 and the 5 freeway. So basically, if you want your money, you're going to do what we say. And the federal government's been doing that for a long, long time. But I do feel like that's a little bit different than what I'm going to complain about here in a moment, because it felt like that was equitably enhanced or enacted on all the states, right? So if they wanted to change all the states' blood alcohol content from 0.15 to 0.12 to 0.10 to 0.08, you could argue that there was obviously a public good in that, and they would withhold federal funds to the states until they complied. And then, a mile of freeway in California is probably a similar cost. 2-lane, 1 mile freeway is probably similar as a cost of a 1 mile, 2-lane freeway in Idaho or Wyoming. So I feel like that was kind of fair and equitable. And we'll get to why I don't think that's the case in HR Bill 1319. But what we're seeing now, and I'll be honest, if I was a resident of a state not called California, I would be really pissed off at this bill Because what we're seeing now in this HR 1319, American Rescue Plan Act, is that the federal government is basically picking winners and losers. And not surprisingly, I'm sure Republicans have done this many times when they have controlled the House and the Senate and the presidency. But right now, because we have Democrats controlling the House, the Senate, and the presidency, right now the winners and losers they're picking are blue states over red states. And so what you'll see when we get into the meat of this bill is that a big chunk of the $1.9 trillion that was just passed in stimulus, a large portion of it, several $100 billion, is going to what is effectively a state bailout fund. And the problem, as we'll get into this, is that the state bailout fund, the way that they concocted this bill and they named it and they are distributing the money, is going to go overwhelmingly to blue states by design, which means you can no longer vote on your local policy and your taxation and vote with your feet by moving to a high tax state like California, where you presumably get more benefits, or moving from California to a low tax state like maybe Kansas or Nevada, in order to, again, vote with your feet and decide, hey, what version of state taxes versus state benefits do I want? So for example, if you live in California and you're currently looking down the barrel of, somewhere between 2% on the low end, 12.3% on the high end, and that's going up, of state income taxes, you could say, hey, you know what? Well, I'll vote with my feet and maybe I won't get as much culture or as many services, or I won't live as close to the beach, but I can move to Nevada or Texas or Tennessee or Florida and pay zero state income tax. You used to be able to do that. You can still do that. However, what's happening with this federal bill is that now the Fed is taxing everybody evenly, presumably, at a federal level, and we can get into tax rates and tax brackets a little bit later, but they're effectively taxing everybody at the federal level and then deciding what states are going to get a lion's share of the bailout money, right? And this is problematic because if you live in a state like I live, California, where we, through our own state choices, locking down businesses, not collecting tax revenue because businesses have been closed, putting the economy a distant second, third, or fourth behind public policy on health and safety. You haven't balanced your budget. You have huge underfunded pension and liabilities. And basically the state budget looks like shit. If you're one of the states that has done that, they have crafted a way in this bill to get those states more federal bailout money than the states like Florida that have stayed open, that have kept the unemployment rate low, that have decided to keep their economy going. And what they're really doing is they're taxing everybody at a federal level to bail out the blue states that have not managed their money or their economy as well. And so what's interesting, and you can see here if you start to scroll through the bill, so you want to go to the text of the bill. There's a summary here, right? And even reading the summary, if you read the summary of these real bills on the congressional website, you will have more knowledge than most reporters, right? And the reason why I'm trying to show how easy it is to get to the meat and potatoes of a bill is because as Americans, what we've gotten in the habit of is we will read an editorial that agrees with the point of view written on an article on a biased website. So it's like an editorial of an editorial of an editorial, and you're not really getting the real context of the bill. So you can actually go and get the real context of any bill that is ever passed at the federal or state level of government. So let's go to the text of this, right? And if you go to the text of this, you can see scrolling the cursor couldn't keep up, all the way down, here's all the different departments and committees that got their say, and the entire bill here, probably 230 something pages of information, just goes on and on. You can look up every single dollar that is presumably going to be spent from this bill, and the entire bill is here, and you can, oh man, it doesn't let you scroll up. Okay, I take back my comment on the website being well laid out, because you can't just easily pick up the scroller on the side and scroll back up. But if you wanted to look at this and you kind of wanted to see where the bulk of the money was going, one of the complaints, this has become like the Fox News conservative talking point, which is falsified at worst and a generalization or a mischaracterization of the bill at best. But, it's basically your right-wing talking points is that, well, only 9% of the bill is going towards COVID funding. So let's look at it, right? you can look through here and you can see, hey, what is the Committee on Agriculture? What did they request out of the bill? You can look at the Committee on Health. You can look at the, let's scroll down a little bit more. This is all Committee for Health, Committee on Banking and Housing and Urban Affairs. And you would probably say, right, if you were trying to disingenuously parse out this bill and all the finance, you would say, well, emergency rental assistance doesn't really go towards COVID relief or COVID research or COVID health programs. But if we're being honest, and we've put a lot of people out of their house because of what we've done with COVID, then probably this emergency rental assistance and emergency housing vouchers, although I disagree with them at a libertarian level, you can understand why that would be worked into a COVID relief bill or a rescue plan, right? So both parties, as usual, being totally disingenuous. And you can scroll through here and you can see what all the different committees and the departments have requested. What was interesting is that I looked through here and there wasn't a whole lot on defense. Usually the defense committees or the defense department sneaks in all kinds of crazy stuff, and you would be looking at this and be like, wait a minute, this is a COVID relief rescue plan. Why are we funding the development of F-22 fighter craft to the tune of $100 billion in something like this? And I was happy to see that that's not in here. So that's cool. We're not having kind of a endless additional spending on the military. I knew that was going to happen. You can go ahead and mark that where we're going to edit that out. And so you go down here and there's some interesting stuff that's going on and how they're regulating pensions and Medicare and Medicaid, all part of kind of the overall health, the health system. And then it gets into the bill. It lays out every single line item. And without boring you with scrolling all the way through this, I have another browser here open where we're going to subtitle M, and this is under section, what department is this under? I think this is under Health and Services, Committee for Health and Services. But regardless, if you scroll all the way down here to subsection M, if you're interested and you're following along, you can just find this in the table of contents. Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, right? So it's a little confusing. And I still haven't been able to even parse through all this. I hired a tutor, actually. Shout out to Wyzant, W-Y-Z-A-N-T. Wyzant is an awesome website where you can find tutors for just about any subject possibly imaginable. And I knew that as I was diving into this podcast, I was going to screw up something royally on politics. So I hired a political tutor, kind of going back to college night class on my own time, which I'm sure my wife is thrilled that I'm taking 2 hours out of my evening when we could be watching a movie to basically hire a tutor. But we were looking through this today, and you can see there's some different places where the money is laid out. In one of the areas, it shows that this is $219 billion, almost $220 billion. So that's 220 followed by 9 zeros. And then there's another place in here where there's $50 billion to actually adjudicate this money and pay for the Secretary of Administration. So effectively, this is paying for the bureaucracy of administering this bill. And then it goes down to talk about some other stuff than the reserve fund of $4.5 billion. So, depending on how you were to interpret this, somewhere between $270 and $300 billion is going to go to the states. And then we have some additional how that money is laid out and allocated, right? So if you start to scroll down on how will this money, again, be parsed out to the different states, and where is my complaint, Scott Groves on the Edge podcast, where is my complaint with how this money is being spent, and why, if I was a citizen of Florida, would I be insanely pissed off at the taxpayers in the state of California? And it's because of this little allocation, section B, subsection 3. For those of you that aren't familiar with Roman numerals, that will look like an I. And hold on, let me enjoy the Padron because it's amazing. If you look at this allocation of funds, right? And then you go down to section III. Well, how are they going to give this money? Are they going to give it by population? Are they going to give it by need? Are they going to give it distributed by the states that have the highest payment of federal taxes? I feel like there could be a lot of ways to fairly take money from all the citizens of the United States and redistribute it to all the citizens of the United States. I don't agree with that. The libertarian in me wishes there was no federal taxes or very small federal taxes to fund a very small government. But if you're going to do this, if you're going to take $1 trillion in debt and current taxpayer money and future taxpayer money, and you're going to fund this huge bailout program or rescue program. There seems like a whole lot of ways you could do it fairly. And here's just the little knife in the back from the Democrats to favor the blue states. Is it says here, after application of all clauses, yada, 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 the secretary has an additional amount to each state of the 50 states plus the District of Columbia in an amount which bears the same promotion of such remainder as the average estimated number of seasonally adjusted unemployed individuals. So what they're basically going to do is they're going to split the number, we're going to split the 270 billion to 300 billion, however much this ends up being. And there's a bunch of other places in here where they're spending 10 billion here and 20 billion here and 40 billion here. So I've seen some estimates that as much as 500 to 700 billion dollars might be going to the states, which kind of makes sense. But the way that they're going to divvy that number up is they're going to say, again, which bears the same proportion of such remainder as the average estimated number of seasonally adjusted unemployed individuals, as measured by the Bureau of Labor Statistics and local area unemployment statistics in the state or District of Columbia over the 3-month period ending December 2020. Bears the average estimated number of seasonally adjusted unemployed individuals to all 50 states. So here's what the federal government is going to do. They are going to take all this money from all the taxpayers across the nation, and then they're going to say, well, the states that have the highest unemployment rates are going to get a lion's share of the money because we're going to distribute the money based on the last 3 months of 2020. So that would be October, November, and December of 2020. And they're going to look at the unemployment numbers for that. And then they're going to use those percentages based on how much of a percentage of unemployed people you had to come up with the formula to divvy out the numbers or to divvy out the money, right? So if you're a taxpayer in the state of Florida, where you guys currently have, and I just went directly to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Let's compare Florida with California because I got a lot of friends in Florida and I live in California. So Florida, as of January 2021, which is probably December numbers, which is what this bill is tied to, December numbers are probably tied to January 2021. When they released them, it probably meant the December numbers, or it's going to be close enough for what we're talking about. But Florida was at 4.8% unemployment, right? California was at 9% unemployment. So California is going to get, per HR Bill 1319, the rescue plan, they're going to get almost twice as much money in federal subsidies, federal payouts, whatever it is, Medicaid relief, however they end up distributing the monies. California is going to get twice as much money because we made bad decisions. We made bad decisions, right? And if you look at, and you can fact check this in 50 different ways, so feel free to kind of come up with your own interpretation. If you look at blue states versus red states, and some people look at blue states versus red states based on the last presidential election. Some people look at blue states versus red states based on, is the governor a Democrat or a Republican? Some people look at blue states versus red states based on other trends, congressional seats. But in general, however you want to slice it, right now in America, because the blue states have been more aggressive in locking down and putting more people on unemployment versus the red states that have been a little bit more conservative to keep the trend, status quo, let businesses open back up, let schools open back up. So they've had much lower unemployment. In general, and I looked up these numbers today, your average unemployment rate in all states that trend blue, whether you look that up, congressional, last presidential election, governors who are Democrat. And there's a couple weird ones in there where Massachusetts is like highly liberal and is a deep blue voting state in federal elections, but they have a Republican governor, which is kind of unique, but I digress. The average blue state is currently running at 7.61 unemployment, where your average red state is running at 5.03 unemployment. And politicians are not stupid. They know this, right? One of the reasons why there was a exact 50-50 vote, 50 Democrats voted for this bailout bill, 50 Republicans voted against this bailout bill. And obviously when that happens, the person who presides the Senate, which is the vice president, Kamala Harris, she gets to cast the tie-breaking vote. The reason not a single Republican voted for it is because of this. Because, well, there's probably many reasons, but this is one of the main reasons. They knew that what was happening is the red states that stayed open, that kept their unemployment rates low, and ended up doing the right thing, because we're now seeing that their death rates in states that remained open aren't any higher than they are in states that locked down dramatically and had these draconian measures on their economy. They're getting screwed, right? If you live in a low unemployment state and you are a federal taxpayer, you are getting screwed right now, because they are taking a majority of the money out of your pocket to redistribute it to the taxpayers in the states who, through their own legislation, their own state assembly, their own governor, have mismanaged their money. And, you know, when you start talking about the rhetoric that's been going on the last couple of years of Donald Trump and the divisiveness and the just the overall anger, you know, you heard people on the far left and the far right talking about crazy shit like civil war, and the country has never been as divided as it has felt the last 4 years, which I tend to agree, other than the fact when we actually fought a civil war. You know, when you start talking about things that divide people, when you find new and creative ways to take money out of the pocket of people over here who have managed their finances and put it in the pocket of the people over here who have mismanaged their finances, and I don't care if that's one-on-one or state by state, you're going to get a really contentious, angry populace, right? Because I think if more people actually read this bill, and I've read through probably 100 pages of it, not all 250 pages of it, if you've read through this bill and you live in a fiscally responsible state, everything about this bailout fund should piss you off to no degree. And if you're a Californian who is like myself and kind of disgusted with the way that California has handled the lockdowns and we handle our general finances throughout the state and the county of Los Angeles, it feels kind of dirty, right? And also it feels like, hey, even if I wanted to leave California to avoid the state taxes here at the California level, who cares? Because if I move to Texas, they're just going to take an overwhelming share, or they're going to take more federal taxes to bail out the states that have mismanaged their money. And the whole thing, this whole idea of a, you know, federal republic where we have a republic of states that report up to the federal government but are not beholden to them necessarily, this whole kind of 200-year experiment fails. And I think this is the most divisive, gross part about this bill. You know, you could criticize individual spending lines and why are we spending money on this, and why are we spending $100 million on an endowment for the arts in a bill that's supposed to rescue people from this horrible pandemic. But if you really look at the thing that has the potential to be super, super divisive, this could be the thing. Because guess what? The political pendulum swings back and forth. You know, we went from Clinton to Bush, and Bush to Obama, and Obama to Trump, and Trump to Biden. The political pendulum swings back and forth. And I think if the shoe was on the other foot and Republicans had crafted a way to take money out of the pocket of California taxpayers to put into the pocket of Texas and Florida taxpayers, I think there would be a huge outrage in the media about this. So enough about this topic, but I just think it's interesting that there is a way for kind of the lay person like myself, or like you, who maybe didn't get a degree in economics or political science in college. I didn't even finish college, but there is a way to go look at these bills, and they're not crafted in such a way that you can't read them or understand or see what effectively the meat and potatoes are. So that's my first thought of the day. And my second thought of the day, or thought number two, depending on how we decide to title this this segment, is, don't get me wrong, I have thoroughly enjoyed the memes of Biden falling on the staircase on the way up to Air Force One. This has really been the last 12 months since people got bored and they were stuck at home during the pandemic. This has really been the year of the memes on both sides of the political spectrum, everything from comedy to pop culture to politics. I mean, the meme game, for all of you out there that are making memes in the comedic world, thank you. You've been a silver lining in this craziness of the pandemic. But really, at the end of the day, fuck, let it go, man. I don't know how often I'm going to get a text message from one of my friends that is farther to the right about how this is proof that he's unfit to serve and he has Alzheimer's and his better days are past him, which, you know, when you're 80, most of your better days are past you. But you know, I hate it when people latch on to something in the zeitgeist, the social zeitgeist, the cultural zeitgeist, to prove their political point, instead of doing the work that we just did, which is, go through HR Bill 1192, go through and learn a little bit about the money that's being spent, go through and learn a little bit about how government works, and then make your decision about why you think Trump is a horrible president or Biden is a horrible president. But the idea that we've boiled down some of the most important political conversations to a meme, like a meme is fun to entertain, bumper sticker politics, Bush lied, people died. That's interesting. That's a good way to rally your base and get everybody fired up and angry at each other, but let it go. I'll tell you, I didn't like it when they did it to Howard Dean. If you guys remember back in the, oh man, that's going ways back, 2004, maybe 2000, either 2000 or 2004 primaries, when Howard Dean did that weird thing and he sounded like a character out of South Park and he was all fired up because he just won one of the primaries and he just went, "Arr, arr, ah!" It was weird. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, don't you kind of want a president who's fired up about being the president? I guess Chris, you're gonna have to clip in like that sound effect, because when Howard Dean on that stage went, and then we're gonna go to Delaware, and then we're gonna go to California, and then we're gonna go to Texas. Arr, ah! Like that ruined his run for president. I thought Howard Dean was a pretty good guy. Like maybe I didn't agree with some of his politics, but he seemed genuinely interested in helping the American public. And the right-wing media at that time just ran that to death as proof that he was not fit to be president. I didn't like it when they did it to Bob Dole. If you remember when Bob Dole was running for president, at one point he had a slip of the tongue. I think this was when he was running against, I guess it was Clinton. Clinton for the Clinton's second term. And at one point he said Brooklyn Dodgers. And I swear to God, for 3 weeks, the only thing that the news led with was, whoa, Bob Dole, out of touch, clearly has Alzheimer's. Do you want to go back to the 50s when men believed that women should be barefoot and pregnant? Because that's what Bob Dole's going to do if he still believes the Dodgers are in Brooklyn instead of Los Angeles. And I was like, guys, let it go. Let it go. I didn't like when they did it to Obama and he got caught in the middle of a speech after traveling for 5 days on the campaign trail, probably sleeping a total of 2 hours in 5 days. And he said, we've been to all 52 states. Now, I'm pretty sure Obama, a college grad, knows that there's 50 states. Maybe he meant 50 states and a couple territories. Maybe he meant 42 states. All I know is if there was a camera on me 24/7 for an entire election cycle, 20 people would want to murder me. A couple hundred people would no longer be my friend. And I would sound like a babbling idiot if every word that ever came out of my mouth was on camera. So I didn't like it when they did it to him. I didn't like it going back to Dan Quayle when they were trying to win the culture wars and, Dan Quayle misspelled potato, or he spelled it in an alternate fashion, or he thought there was an E at the end. I can't even remember. I probably can't spell potato right now. Right now, if you're listening to this, write down the word potato and see if your potato has an E or not an E in it. I still don't know how to spell it correctly. So I didn't like when they played that over and over and over again. And, one of the things that we're seeing right now, we saw this when Democrats wanted to villainize McCain and scare people. And we saw it when Republicans wanted to villainize Biden and scare people with this idea of like McCain or Biden's going to die tomorrow. And then previously, I can't even remember her name, Sarah Palin was going to become president, or Kamala Harris was going to become president. Neither Sarah Palin or Kamala Harris were prepared to be president. Sarah Palin, she'd been a governor of a large state, really had no federal experience. Kamala Harris in her own primary couldn't get 0.2% of the vote to stay on the stage, so her own party rejected her. The thought that either of them are particularly prepared to be president is probably a valid concern, but fear-mongering with this idea of like McCain or Biden are going to die tomorrow, it's just Coke versus Pepsi, right? Both sides of the political spectrum, they have their marketing department. One is Coke, one is Pepsi. They're constantly changing their media strategy on trying to convince you which one is cooler and why the other one is more evil. And really, if you just look at the ingredients, it's the same carcinogenic bullshit, loaded with sugar, bad for your health. They both suck. And the reality is Dr. Pepper is better anyway. So drink Dr. Pepper. It's better than Coke or Pepsi. So that's my second thought. Just let it go. Move on to something more substantive. Whoever's still out there talking about Biden falling, unless it's a really funny meme, I want to see the funny memes. But if you're really crafting your political opinion off of somebody tripping on Air Force One, fucking grow up and learn a little bit more about politics. And my third thought for the day is kids in cages. Holy God, this is crazy. And I'm not mad really at either political party, although I don't think it's racist or becoming a white nationalist or xenophobic or anti-Hispanic or anti-Hispanic X, whatever we were supposed to call it these days. I don't think you are any of those things if you think your country should have a secure border with fair immigration policy. My thought for the last 20 years, I don't care who the president was, is that it should be 10 times harder to get to this country illegally, and it should be 10 times easier to get to this country legally. Look, if you have something to offer the country, whether that's hard work with your hands and your physical labor, or hard work with your mind because you're here on a intellectual, student, or work visa, I think it should be so easy to get into America legally, because that is really going to be the continuing backbone of our economy and our country. Spoiler alert, unless you're a Native American, you are an immigrant. And B, it's the way that we're going to compete over the next 100 years with China and India and Russia. Because if we're being honest, Japan, China, India, to a lesser extent, Russia, they are, in fact, very racist countries. Go try to get a job in China as an American or as a Mexican or as somebody from the UK or Scotland or Ireland. It's not easy. You won't be embraced with open arms and have access to all the same opportunity that you would in America. So my thought has always been, it should be 10 times easier to get here legally. It should be 10 times harder to get here illegally. We should have drones and walls and barriers and underground trenches and nothing medieval. I don't want to see anybody getting hurt, but there should be a huge, huge, huge deterrent to coming here illegally. But that could be easily fixed if everybody knew that they could come here legally, just looking for hard work and more opportunity, which is why all of our ancestors came here for one reason or another. Well, not all of our ancestors. Obviously, there's a big, big black eye on the American history of immigrants that we forced here, and that's a different podcast, but you get my drift. So this idea that either party, whether it's the Republicans now that Biden is in office, or whether it was exactly Biden 6 months ago when Trump was in office, talking about kids in cages, how horrible this is, how we're detaining families at the border, how we're separating families at the border. Look, I'm not smart enough to know everything about immigration policy. I will tell you, somebody who I think is very genuine on immigration policy is Dan Crenshaw. He's the one-eyed junior congressman out of Texas. He lives in Texas. He has a lot of exposure to what's going on in border towns. He seems to be one of the more level-headed conservatives who will speak out immediately against stuff like the Capitol riots. He spoke out pretty aggressively against Ted Cruz, who's the senator from his own state, on how they were grandstanding, leading to that whole January 6th thing. So I think Dan Crenshaw is like a pretty legit, genuine guy. He's an ex-Navy SEAL, got his eye blown out in battle. And then again, junior congressman who just seems to generally care. He has a podcast called We Hold These Truths. He's done a couple on immigration where he really dives in deep to the policy. I would recommend maybe one of those, and then maybe a counterbalance point from, maybe somebody at think tank at like the Rand Institute or something like that also writes policy information on, or writes papers on immigration policy. So I have no desire to dig into the nuance of it because I'm not educated in that area. Maybe that, Chris, we got to put that on the list. We got to find somebody who's actually an expert in immigration policy, maybe an immigration attorney or something like that, just since it's such a hot button. That'd be cool. But what I do know is it's all false outrage. Give me a fucking break. When Ocasio-Cortez got filmed in an empty parking lot looking at a chain link fence with nothing on the other side, crying for the kids that were stuck in cages when Trump was president, it was all grandstanding. It was all fake. And now whatever policies have changed, whether that's Biden's fault or not Biden's fault, or whether that's lack of cooperations between Mexico and the triangle countries and all the other stuff that you read about, all these hot button items, whoever's fault it is, there is more mass immigration trying to come across the border, which means there are more kids in cages, which is happening. And by the way, I don't know, where else do you put them? Where else do you detain people? I don't think it's inhumane. And I've tried to read a bit about it to see if it is inhumane, because I happen to be married to a Mexican lady who happens to have family members who came across the border illegally at one point in their life. So I don't want people to experience inhumane conditions. But this fake outrage, right? We're seeing it right now by the right meaning conservatives, this huge fake outrage of this, crisis at the border, which maybe there is a crisis, but I don't feel that genuinely, other than some of the border town politicians like in New Mexico, maybe Southern California and Southern Texas, I don't get the feeling that some, junior congressman from Minnesota really cares about the Mexicans on the border and what's going on with their, with their detainment at different processing centers. And I don't think that the Democrats really cared about it either when Trump was in office. They just wanted to make sure that one of his biggest campaign promises, which is build the wall and stop illegal immigration, they just want to make sure that that never happened for political points. And just please think for yourself before you get in a fight with one of your friends on Facebook, or you decide to unfriend somebody, or you decide to say something really rude that you can't take back. Because I've done that before. I'm just like every other human, a giant hypocrite. I get angry. I post or say things I wish I could take back. But I would just implore you, before you say something on this topic that you either can't take back or that isn't in line with your character, just know that these are all just political talking points by Coke and Pepsi. And they switch around, and whatever the narrative is, you have to push, right? So when Trump was first into office, even all of it's been debunked that there was some type of Russian collusion. It's all been debunked. It's all been investigated to death. There was no political tampering that Trump and Russia was in bed with each other to get Trump elected. It's the Steele dossier, all that. We could go on and on and on. But it was just fake outrage about Russia, right? And by the way, there are probably some real concerns about Russia tampering with our election. But did we ever get to the bottom of that? No, of course not, because we had to have outrage over the other side, the people on the other side of the aisle. And now the outrage is Republicans talking about Biden is soft on China. Am I worried about China? Do I think they're a horrible player in the world economy? Do I think they're slowly taking steps to replace the U.S. as the dollar being the reserve currency? And do I think China is basically buying their way into making much of the rest of the world look more like them than the United States, which I think is a bad thing? Absolutely. Do I think there's a whole lot of Republicans who actually care? No, they're just trying to score political points by saying Biden is going to be soft on China and pointing out anything they can. So what I would say is that the more us voters can get away from the anger and the knee-jerk reaction to, slam or own your opponent, just think about it. And hopefully if we think about it and we're a little bit more level-headed, we will force the politicians who represented us to be a little bit more thoughtful and think about it and not try to just fuel fake outrage. And then we can actually get some policy passed that means something. Because right now, China does in fact have a 100-year plan to replace us as the dominant power on the face of planet Earth. And we can't even balance our budget every 90 days as a country. So that's my thoughts. My last thought for today is just don't buy into the fake outrage. Be nicer to the person who on the other side of the political aisle than you normally would. And maybe things get better across the board in our country. Thanks for listening. Scott Groves on the Edge podcast.